Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Fdle Special Agent in Charge, Mark Perez, with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. Today, we are here to announce the break in the case of the 2016 abduction of then 7-year-old Brian Williamson from Madison County. With me today is Madison Police Chief Reggie Alexander, FBI Special Agent in Charge James Van Pelt, and Madison County Sheriff Ben Stewart, along with the investigators that were a part of this team from the start. Almost 2 years ago, on a Sunday evening, 7-year-old Brian Williamson walked out with his mother and aunt to the Fred's dollar store on US 90. Upon returning home, Brian left his house to walk to his cousin's residence. Brian wanted to share his candy with his cousin. On his way back home, Brian was abducted by a stranger. After 12 hours, Brian was dropped off in Jacksonville, where he knocked on the door of a home on Hammond Boulevard. The homeowner did not know Brian, but had seen the Amber Alert and knew the boy from the picture. In the days following the abduction and recovery, investigators and analysts with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Madison Police Department, and the Madison County Sheriff's Office worked around the clock, retrieving hundreds of hours of video surveillance from Madison to Jacksonville, fielding dozens of citizen leads, and distributing informational flyers across Florida and South Georgia. Although we were unable to develop substantial leads after several weeks, investigators never stopped working on this case. Knowing that we had to find this dangerous predator, we continued searching and kept our focus on solving this crime. After nearly 2 years, it gives me great relief to tell you that we know who Brian's abductor is, and that this dangerous predator is no longer a threat to our community. Yesterday, 44-year-old Jason Leonard Haling of Jacksonville was charged with kidnapping and capital sexual battery in this case. Haling is currently in custody on an unrelated case by the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office. He was arrested in February in Georgia for capital sexual battery that occurred in Jacksonville, Florida. After noticing similarities in the case, Fdle agents obtained a search warrant for Haling's DNA. Their hunch paid off. Last week, Fdle crime laboratory scientists developed a profile from Haling's DNA that was collected, and a determination was made that his DNA matched the DNA found on Brian following the abduction. Today is bittersweet. The community is safer with Haling in custody, and hopefully now the Williamson family can finally get the justice they deserve. Unfortunately, it came at the expense of another child being victimized by Haling. Still, I could not be more proud of the investigators and analysts from the police department, the FBI, the Sheriff's Office, and of course, our Fdle members who spent countless hours investigating this case, and our crime laboratory scientists who gave us the break we needed. Observant investigators with unwavering dedication, along with DNA, helped solve this case. From the very beginning, the Federal Bureau of Investigation has been a great partner in this case. From investigative assistance to offering reward money and the tip line, the FBI has been an essential part of this investigation. And now I'll turn it over to Special Agent James Van Pelt for some comments.
Thank you, Mark. Good morning. From very early in this case, the FBI Jacksonville Division offered every available resource to our law enforcement partners to assist in the search for Brian Williamson. That assistance did not stop even after he was found in Jacksonville. We continued to dedicate our people and our investigative assets to help identify the person who committed this heinous crime. In the days that followed, we conducted an extensive search, put up billboards, and as Mark said, offered a reward for information to the public. And even though we received numerous tips, none of those ultimately led us to the person responsible. The days and weeks and months passed, but we never gave up hope that we would find justice for Brian. Then, in January of this year, the FBI's Jacksonville Division received a call from the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office requesting FBI assistance in locating another subject. We immediately began working with our counterparts in other states, and we quickly located 44-year-old Jason Leonard Haling in Georgia. JSO charged Haling with capital sexual battery against a child, and he has been in the Duval County Jail ever since. In the meantime, the DNA evidence that the FBI's evidence response team and the JSO collected when Haling was arrested was being processed. We're very pleased when last month the results of those tests came back, and Haling's DNA received a match in the FBI's CODIS DNA database. So in closing, I just want to say we're proud of the entire FBI Jacksonville team and all of our law enforcement partners for their complete refusal to give up on finding justice for young Brian. I'd like to specifically recognize the extraordinary work of the detectives with the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office and their collaboration with this arrest that made this possible. This specifically includes JSO detectives Kyle Matthews and Nicholas Kasakis, as well as FBI Special Agent Abigail Boccaccio. The good people across our agencies who specialize in solving violent crimes against children have a passion for what they do. The agents, the investigators, the analysts, the technicians. And this arrest is a direct result of their relentless efforts. I'm hopeful the people of Madison County, Jacksonville, and everywhere in between can breathe a little easier tonight knowing that Jason Leonard Haling is no longer an unknown threat to our communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Agent Van Pelt. And of course, we couldn't have done it, as I said before, without the support of the Madison County, or the Madison Police Department and the Madison County Sheriff's Office. Their investigators never wavered in their determination, along with our FDLE agents that were dedicated from the very start to finding this kidnapper. And again, some of them are here today joining us, so thank you for that. So in closing, I want to thank all our partners, to include Jacksonville Sheriff Mike Williams, who were eager to help us from the start when we found the match. And finally, we would be remiss if we did not thank the media, you here today, for your help in solving this case. From the time the Amber Alert was issued to the time that Brian was found in Jacksonville, the information you provided to the public was crucial and probably prevented more crimes from being committed. While Haling is being charged with the Madison kidnapping, our case is not over. And this is why we called you here today, to tell you the good news, but also ask the media once again to please let our readers and viewers know that if they have any information related to Mr. Haling and the abduction that occurred 2 years ago and the crime that he committed, to please reach out to us and share that information to us. And to call the tip line that you see here, which is our FDLE Live Oak Field Office, and that's 1-800-226-5630. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
How is Brian doing these days?
Brian is a resilient young man. I can tell you we continue to stay in contact with him from the day he was recovered up until this week. He is just an amazing young boy that has been resilient, and like any child that has been put through trauma, he still has a lot of healing to do. But I can tell you he's a fighter, and he was really a strong part of the reason why we continue to fight, because we saw that fire in him and we wouldn't give up for him and his family. He's doing well, but I would ask that the public continue to support him and respect the family and his privacy during this time, that he continue to get the healing that he needs to go beyond this. But it is a good resolution for him and the family to know that this abductor and this violent offender is no longer a threat to him or anybody else.
Where was DNA found on the boy? Was he molested?
He is being charged with capital sexual battery. And without getting into any specifics at this time, that will eventually come out in the crime. Unfortunately, he was, assaulted. But the DNA and the evidence that was discovered was matched, and we'll save the specifics for the trial when they eventually come out.
So, what can you tell us about Mr. Haling, if he lived in Jacksonville or in this area, or what he was doing going down the interstate apparently that day, can you tell us anything about him, where he resided, what he did for a living, where he
Sure.
was known to travel, all that kind of stuff?
Mr. Haling, as far as we can tell, has some loose ties and affiliations to Madison County. He has family in the adjacent city in Lee, and so he is familiar with the area. So he was familiar with the area and the locations that he was traveling. As far as his profession, he's been in and out of various works. He worked as an interstate trucker and driving big rigs across the country. So we're looking at those possible connections as well and what impact his travels may have had in other areas. But he is familiar with this area, and he was residing in the Jacksonville area at the time of his arrest by Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, where he has family over there. The location where Brian was dropped off was very close to the proximity of where his family lives in Jacksonville. So the connection and all the dots started to make sense once we started looking deeper into who he was and where he had been throughout his lifetime.
Okay, and how concerned are you all that, given he was a trucker and he's in this, been charged in another case, that there are other victims out there?
There is a concern there, and we are currently releasing the information to other law enforcement agencies in the Southeast to see if there's any other similarities of crimes that were committed that haven't been linked yet, and the possibilities of whether or not that Haling may be responsible for some additional crimes. We're hopeful that he's not, and there isn't other victims out there, but due to his profession and his travels, we are being cautious with the approach and notifying those law enforcement agencies across the Southeast.
Has he talked to investigators about this, or has he invoked his rights to remain silent?
He's invoked his rights.
Will he be, has he been charged, arrested in this case?
So he has
this
been
other
charged,
victim?
yes, he has been charged. He was charged and arrested by the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office for that capital sexual battery that occurred in their jurisdiction. Yesterday, we filed formal charges in the Jacksonville area, so there's a hold and a detainer on him in the Jacksonville County Jail, and at the appropriate time, he will be brought back to Madison County and be formally arrested through the judicial process. But he has been charged with both the kidnapping and the capital sexual battery.
Okay.
So he's only charged for kidnapping in the Williamson case?
No, both the kidnapping and capital sexual battery in the Williamson case.
For both cases?
The Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, theirs is just a capital sexual battery, and ours is the kidnapping along with capital sexual battery.
What kind of a sentence are we potentially talking about if there was a conviction for capital sexual battery?
Due to the heinous nature, it is a child under 12 years old, and those offenses carry a life sentence if convicted.
Can you talk at all about the similarities between those two cases?
The similarities just came in the initial description and the age of the victims. And once we started seeing that, and obviously the geographical proximity of it, our investigators were very astute, and we were glad again that the public was very aware because of the media attention that this case received. And so that astute investigator with the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office reached out to our agents and the counterparts here, and we started comparing notes. And that's where we saw the similarities in his connections, Mr. Haling's connections to this community, and the proximity of where Brian was dropped off at once he was victimized. So the dots started connecting, and everything started to make sense. And the last thing we needed, obviously, was the concrete proof, which came with the DNA. And that was a little bit of an arduous process, but we were patient in knowing that we had collected significant DNA from Brian after he was recovered. It was uploaded into the CODIS system, which is a nationwide system. At that time, there was no match. So when the Jacksonville case broke and the evidence that was collected by the FBI was uploaded, that's where the match occurred. And then we had to go back and confirm that, and that's why we collected Mr. Haling's DNA recently. And the scientists compared all the evidence to the known DNA samples, and it was a positive match for Mr. Haling.
And I know you said that there may be other cases out there, other victims. Is there anything that leads you to believe that, or is that just something you want to make sure of?
At this time, we have no information indicating that there are other victims, but in the abundance of caution, and again, due to the nature of his profession and his travels, we are spreading the information just to make sure that there isn't any other victims out there that have not been linked back potentially. So at this time, there is no information leading us to believe that he did victimize other persons at this time.
Sorry if you already addressed this, but do you know how he knew these victims, if at all?
At this time, our victim, we believe it was just a random act, and that he saw, unfortunately, Brian, and there was we cannot see any relationship that Mr. Haling had with Brian Williamson.
Where was the child last seen, Brian? Where was he last seen before he was abducted?
He was actually in his neighborhood, in the trailer park that he resides in. And so he had just walked back home, and he had left his home and walked down to his cousin's home, which is about 2 or 3 houses down. And a car pulled up in the roadway and just grabbed Brian and sped off.
What type of car? What type of vehicle?
At that time, we believed it was a Chevy-type vehicle. And so that's, again, another connection that we found in the case, that the vehicle that we believe was used in the abduction has been recovered, and it did match it was a Chevy Malibu, dark in color. We believed it was black in color, but it was a dark gray vehicle, and it was attributed back to a family member of Mr. Haling. And that is currently being processed as we speak.
When was the incident that led to his arrest in the Jacksonville case?
The Jacksonville case, I believe the incident was either in January or February. I don't have the specific details, but I would ask that you refer back to the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office for specifics on their case. But my understanding, it was either in January or early February, and that's when they started pursuing Mr. Haling as a possible suspect. And at that time, he had fled to Georgia.
Considering the similarities between the cases, is human trafficking something you're looking into?
At this time, no, just because it looks like he, abducted Brian for the sole purpose of committing that assault. And then, again, the similarities, not the abduction, but the similarities of the assault that occurred in the Jacksonville case.
How does it feel to make this break in the case?
It's a great relief. I can tell you we were ecstatic. I know the investigators, this has been 2 years in the making. It was very frustrating on the onset that we didn't receive the breaks that we were expecting or anticipating. But I can tell you, as I said before, the unwavering dedication that our agents had at Fdle, FBI, the investigators with the Madison Police Department and the Sheriff's Office, this was a priority. I mean, this should not happen to any child in any community. And we wanted to make sure, particularly here in Madison County, it's a small county, everybody knows one another, and it was devastating. And it was a priority to solve this case, and we are absolutely thrilled that we were able to finally bring this in to a close and bring a closure, one, but make sure that Mr. Haling was taken off the streets and doesn't have the opportunity to commit this crime again or victimize another child. So we're very pleased, to say the least.
Is the other victim, aside from Brian, a relative of Haling?
Again, I would defer any of the questions that you have related to the Jacksonville case back to them. I think it's appropriate that they answer, any related questions themselves.
And as a trucker, did he ever have these victims in his truck with him?
Again, that's what we're looking into. It's a great question, but that's what the investigators are doing as far as follow-up, looking at where he's been, any potential, passengers and itineraries, and anything that can link us back to not only this case and possibly assist Jacksonville's case, but as we talked about, hoping that there's not another possible victim out there.
What trucking company did he work with?
That I don't have offhand, but I can tell you that the company has been cooperating from the very start once they were notified by our investigators.
Thank you, guys. I have press releases if anything needs that information.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
You actually sent me. I'm John. Nice to meet you. Thank you so much.
It's a team effort.
It is a huge step, especially for Madison County. I'm proud of these guys.
I don't know which one yours is. David, which one are?
Oh, ours is
Is this
blinking.
ours? Or did we just hook the? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. I think Tammy's outside.
It's okay. Go ahead.
Okay.
Kate.
Go ahead and just get them set up.
Yeah, Russell, you wanna
And I'll be right there.
come talk to him at the same time?